My mother once looked me straight in the eye and told me I was too ugly to be seen with her, then she dumped me alone at a restaurant like I was trash. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lyra, and for as long as I can remember, my mother, Marlon, made me feel like I didn't belong. She never called me beautiful, never praised me, never even looked at me with warmth. She always preferred my younger sister, Vea, who fit her idea of perfection, bright, stylish, and charming. I was the quiet one who loved drawing more than makeup, and to my mother, that meant I was a disappointment. The day at the restaurant was the moment everything changed. Marlon invited me to lunch for her birthday, and I honestly thought she wanted to reconnect. I even wore a new dress I saved up for. But as soon as I sat down, she sighed and said I was making her look bad. She laughed at my clothes, then stood up, grabbed Vea's hand, and walked out, leaving me alone at the table. A waiter named Boone saw what happened and gently told me I didn't deserve that kind of treatment. His kindness broke something open in me. I moved out soon after and stayed with my cousin Ray. I worked long shifts and slowly started believing in myself. When my workplace held a design competition, I put my whole heart into it. Somehow, I became a finalist. Suddenly my mother wanted to be involved again, pretending to be proud. But during my speech at the ceremony, I told the truth about growing up unseen and unloved. I didn't mention her name, but everyone understood. For the first time, I felt free. My life began the moment I stopped begging for her approval. Growing up, Lyra learned very quickly that her place in the family was different from her sisters. Vea, the younger one, had a glow that Marlon adored. She was the child who brought smiles, the one who received new clothes, compliments, and gentle touches. Whenever Vea entered a room, Marlon's face softened. But when Lyra stepped in, something in her mother hardened, as if she were suddenly reminded of something she didn't want. Marlon often studied Lyra with a look that made the girl shrink inside herself. She never raised her voice, but the words she used cut in a way that stayed. She described Lyra with careless labels that no child should ever hear. She didn't shout them, she said them casually, like observations she believed were true. Hearing them repeated over time made Lyra accept them as part of her identity, even when they hurt. While Vea received encouragement for every small effort, Lyra's attempts were pushed aside. A drawing she worked on for days would be set down without a glance. If she tried to show excitement over something, Marlon redirected the attention toward Vea, praising her smile, her posture, her poise. It wasn't about fairness, it was about preference, and the message was always the same. One daughter fit the image Marlon wanted. The other did not. Lyra began to measure her worth by the way her mother reacted to her presence. She learned to step lightly, to keep her thoughts to herself, and to expect little warmth. She watched the way Marlon's hands lingered on Vea's shoulders and wondered what it felt like to be welcomed without conditions. By the time she reached her teens, Lyra understood the rules of the household. Affection was earned, not given. Approval was selective. And the love she hoped for from her mother was something she might never receive. When Marlon reached out and asked Lyra to join her for a birthday meal, it felt unexpected. Months had passed without a single invitation, so Lyra took it as a sign that maybe her mother wanted a calmer moment together. She chose simple clothes she felt comfortable in and tried to keep her hopes steady as she walked into the glowing, polished dining room her mother had selected. Marlon and Vea were already seated, both dressed sharply, as if they were attending something formal. The moment Lyra approached, Marlon's eyes drifted over her outfit with a slow, sharp glance that said more than any greeting. When Lyra took her seat, Marlon released a small, humorless laugh and made a comment about how Lyra's appearance dimmed the room. She said it casually, as if pointing out the weather, but it landed in Lyra's chest like a weight she couldn't swallow. Trying to hide her discomfort, Lyra reached for her menu, hoping the conversation would shift. Instead, Marlon kept dropping quiet jabs, each one sharper than the last. Vea watched silently, offering no defense, her gaze fixed on her own reflection in the silverware. A server arrived with water, and Marlon gave him a quick apology for the unpleasant look at the table, tilting her head toward Lyra. Before Lyra could gather the courage to speak, Marlon stood up, smoothing her dress with rehearsed elegance. She announced that she and Vea had reservations somewhere more fitting and told Lyra to take her time. Without waiting for a reply, she and Vea walked out together, leaving Lyra sitting alone among linen tablecloths and polished glasses. The server lingered for a moment, unsure whether to clear the place settings or offer comfort. Lyra sat frozen, staring at the empty chairs, realizing she had been deliberately discarded in a room full of strangers. For a moment, Lyra couldn't move. The room around her kept its soft music and clinking dishes, but she felt as if everything had stopped. Her throat tightened, and the heat of embarrassment spread through her face. She stared at the empty place settings across from her, unable to understand how her mother could walk away so easily, as if leaving her behind was nothing unusual. She didn't know how long she sat there before someone stepped close. The waiter, his name tag read Boone, spoke gently, as if afraid to startle her. He asked if she was all right, not with pity, but with genuine concern. When she looked up, he didn't look away or pretend not to have noticed what happened. He simply offered a quiet presence that felt strangely grounding. Boone brought her a glass of water and set it down without making her feel watched. After a moment, he leaned in slightly and told her she shouldn't be treated like that by anyone, especially not someone who was supposed to care for her. His voice wasn't dramatic or exaggerated. It was steady, calm, and kind. The kind of tone someone uses when they truly mean what they say. Hearing those words from a stranger, someone with no reason to soften the truth, hit Lyra harder than she expected. She'd spent her life absorbing her mother's judgments, convincing herself they were normal, or at least unchangeable. But Boone's simple comment cracked something inside her. It made her realize that the pain she carried wasn't just heavy, it was unnecessary. She thanked him, her voice unsteady, and stood up from the table with a strange mix of hurt and clarity. Walking toward the exit, she understood that something had shifted. She couldn't keep letting her mother define her value. That moment in the restaurant became the line she finally stepped over, quietly, but firmly, toward a different version of herself. Lyra didn't pack much when she left her mother's house. She chose only what she needed, slipping her sketchbooks into a small bag and leaving behind anything that felt tied to old expectations. Her cousin Ray welcomed her into a spare room without questions, offering a calm space that felt completely different from the tension she had grown used to. At first, Lyra felt unsure about every step she took. But she found steady footing at the print shop where she'd been working part-time. She asked for additional hours, and her manager agreed without hesitation. The extra shifts kept her busy and gave her a sense of direction. She learned new tasks, handled more responsibilities, and slowly felt herself becoming stronger in ways she hadn't expected. Living with Ray helped more than she realized. He never intruded, never tried to fix her, but he made the apartment feel safe. They shared simple meals, watched quiet evenings pass by, and allowed silence to be comfortable. Lyra found herself breathing easier, no longer bracing for criticism the moment she walked into a room. With time, she began noticing how much of her behavior had been shaped by her mother's harshness. She caught herself apologizing too quickly, shrinking back from simple compliments, or hesitating before speaking her mind. Recognizing these patterns stung, but it also clarified what needed to change. Lyra practiced saying no, to extra favors, to people who drained her, to habits that held her in place. She tried speaking with more certainty, even if her voice wavered. Every small boundary felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she didn't know she'd lost. In the quiet of Ray's apartment and the steady rhythm of work at the shop, Lyra began building a life not defined by fear. For the first time, she could almost see who she might become. When the print shop joined a statewide design contest, Lyra didn't think much of it at first. It seemed like something meant for the senior staff, not someone who was still learning her footing. But her boss stopped her one afternoon and suggested she create her own entry. He said he'd noticed the way she handled visual details and believed she had something worth sharing. The idea caught her off guard. She'd never been encouraged like that before, not in a way that felt sincere. The thought of entering made her nervous. She wasn't used to putting herself on display, especially not in a competition filled with confident creators. But the more she considered it, the more she felt a quiet pull to try. She'd been carrying heavy feelings for years, feelings she never allowed herself to express out loud. Maybe this was her chance to translate them into something she could finally release. Lyra sat at her small desk in Ray's apartment and started sketching. At first, the lines came out uncertain. Then something shifted. She began drawing shapes that reminded her of loneliness, using empty space to capture moments when she felt pushed aside. She added layers suggesting growth, steady and fragile, rising from places that once felt hollow. She didn't name the emotions as she worked, but they poured out naturally, almost on their own. Hours passed without her noticing. By the time she finished, the design carried a story she had never spoken, one of being left behind yet still finding a way to stand. It wasn't literal, but the message lived beneath the colors and forms. Looking at the final result made her chest tighten, not with fear, but with a sense of truth she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. Submitting it felt risky, but also freeing. For the first time, Lyra felt she had created something that belonged entirely to her. News of Lyra reaching the finalist stage traveled quickly through the family, even though she hadn't planned on sharing it widely. Word reached Marlon through an aunt, and almost overnight, her mother appeared at Ray's door with a bright smile Lyra hadn't seen in years. The sudden warmth felt strange, almost rehearsed, but Lyra didn't react. She simply listened while Marlon spoke proudly about her talented daughter, using a tone that didn't match the way she treated her behind closed doors. When relatives gathered for a weekend meal, Marlon positioned herself beside Lyra as if they were close. She bragged about the event, painting a picture of unwavering support. Lyra stayed quiet, sensing that the performance wasn't for her but for the audience around them. Whenever others stepped away, the sweetness faded. Marlon leaned in, lowering her voice, questioning whether the judges had made a mistake. She murmured that Lyra had never shown much skill and should prepare for disappointment. The words were delivered softly, but they pierced with familiar sharpness. Later, Marlon announced she would join her daughter at the ceremony. She claimed it was important for the household to look united, especially with so many eyes on them. She spoke about presenting themselves well, choosing phrasing that made it clear she was concerned with appearance, not support. Lyra felt a familiar heaviness settle in her chest, recognizing the pattern. Her mother wanted visibility, not connection. Lyra didn't argue. She simply nodded, realizing she no longer needed her mother's approval to breathe. Inside, she understood exactly why Marlon was acting this way. Recognition attracted her, and she didn't want to be left out. What Lyra didn't expect was how calm she felt. The old need for acceptance no longer held the same power. The ceremony was approaching, and Lyra began preparing herself, not for the crowd, but for the moment she would no longer allow anyone, especially her mother. To control her sense of worth, Lyra spent the days before the event watching her mother glide around the family as if she'd always been a steady supporter. It didn't take long to understand the real reason behind the sudden interest. Recognition had drawn Marlon in like a spotlight, and she wanted to stand close enough to be seen as part of it. The change in behavior wasn't affection, it was convenience. Once Lyra noticed this, the disappointment she expected never came. Instead, a quiet clarity settled over her. She thought about speaking up, about telling Marlon to stay home, but the idea felt exhausting. Arguments with her mother always spiraled into sharp remarks and guilt. Lyra knew those exchanges well, the ones that left her drained and questioning herself long after they ended. She didn't want another one. She didn't want tears, shouting, or broken conversations. She wanted something different, something that reflected the woman she was trying to become. Late one night, she sat in the small living room of Ray's apartment, her design laid out across the coffee table. She studied the lines, the spaces, the quiet strength rising through the image. This was the clearest expression she'd ever created. It held everything she had carried for years, without bitterness, without accusations. It didn't need names or explanations. It was honest in a way she had never been allowed to be. That was when she made her choice. She didn't need to prove her mother wrong through arguments. She had another way, one that didn't rely on confrontation, only truth. If Marlon attended, she would see the story Lyra had poured onto the page. It wouldn't expose her with direct claims or pointed words, but it would reveal the neglect Lyra had lived through, the quiet strength she'd built from abandonment. The realization gave Lyra a calm she didn't expect. Her mother could pretend, posture, and cling to appearances. Lyra would simply show her reality, and let the art speak for her. The hall buzzed with quiet chatter as guests filled the rows, and Lyra waited with the other finalists near the stage. She held her hands together to steady the nervous warmth spreading through her chest. This wasn't just another event for her. It felt like a doorway she needed to walk through, no matter how unsteady her steps were. When her name was called, she rose and made her way toward the podium, feeling the light from the overhead fixtures settle across her shoulders. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Marlon seated in the audience. Her mother had chosen a perfectly tailored outfit and positioned herself where she'd be easily noticed. She sat with her shoulders back and a practiced smile, the kind she used whenever she wanted people to believe she was proud and involved. That expression, polished and gleaming, didn't match the coldness Lyra had grown up with. Seeing it now made Lyra feel strangely detached, as if she were observing someone she barely recognized. The host explained that each participant would share what guided their work. As Lyra stepped up to the microphone, the room quieted. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting. She took a slow breath. This was her chance, not to expose anyone, but to speak honestly about what had shaped her. She began describing the emotions behind her design, the ache of being overlooked, the weight of trying to stand tall in places where she felt small, and the slow, steady process of finding strength within herself. She didn't mention names or point fingers. She spoke in a level voice, letting her words carry the truth she'd held inside for years. As she talked, she saw Marlon's smile falter just slightly, the mask slipping around the edges. Lyra kept going, not out of anger, but out of a need to finally claim her own story. When she finished, the applause rose gently around her, a sound that felt like a curtain lifting. Lyra gripped the edges of the podium, her fingers trembling slightly as she began to speak. She didn't need to look at anyone in particular, her words carried their own weight. She told the room about the quiet moments that left marks, the times when encouragement was absent and warmth was conditional. She spoke about being made to feel invisible, about the sting of comparisons, and the loneliness of hoping for care that never came. Then she described a memory she had kept to herself for years, the lunch where she had been left alone in a fancy restaurant. She painted it honestly, the hollow echo of chairs around her, the way it felt to be abandoned in plain sight. Her voice didn't rise in anger, but it was steady and clear, carrying the raw truth of a betrayal she had carried in silence. The audience grew still, sensing the depth of what she was revealing. Her words weren't aimed to shame anyone directly, yet the message was unmistakable. Everyone understood the hurt that had been inflicted by someone who was supposed to protect and cherish her. The room hung on each sentence, the silence pressing like a weight as the story unfolded. When she finished, Lyra looked up and saw the reactions ripple through the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably, the empathy and shock written plainly on their faces. And in the corner, she caught sight of her mother. Marlon's confident, rehearsed expression faltered. The carefully crafted smile crumbled as the truth of Lyra's experiences stood unmistakable in front of her. For the first time, Lyra felt the power of speaking her story fully, without compromise. The air was heavy with the impact of what had been shared, and in that moment, the quiet strength she had built over years finally shone, undeniable and unshakable. When Lyra stepped down from the stage, a wave of quiet murmurs followed her. Strangers and acquaintances alike came forward, sharing kind words and gentle encouragement. Some spoke of how brave it was to reveal vulnerability in front of a room full of people. Others simply nodded, their expressions showing they understood a pain they hadn't voiced themselves. Lyra absorbed it all, feeling a warmth she hadn't known she was capable of accepting. Amid the support, she noticed her mother rising abruptly from her seat. Marlon's face was red, and her steps quick and tense. She muttered about appearances and how Lyra had embarrassed the family, the words harsh and bitter. Without waiting for anyone to respond, she swept past, leaving behind the carefully arranged chairs and the polite applause. The scene was almost surreal, her mother storming away while Lyra remained, calm and steady, the room still buzzing with quiet admiration. Lyra felt an unexpected weight lift from her shoulders. The truth she had carried silently for years had finally been spoken aloud, witnessed by others who didn't need to know the intimate details to understand the heart of her story. She realized she no longer needed to protect her mother's image, no longer had to swallow her own experiences to spare someone else's feelings. Walking through the crowd, hearing soft compliments and words of recognition, Lyra felt lighter than she had in a long time. It wasn't just relief, it was a quiet triumph, a sense that a chapter had ended. For the first time, she understood that freedom could come from simply naming the hurt, and that her own voice was enough. She didn't owe anyone silence, and that knowledge gave her an unexpected, enduring strength. Winning second place felt surreal to Lyra. The certificate, scholarship, and design contract were more than recognition, they were a doorway to a life she had only dared imagine. For the first time, the future seemed something she could shape herself, without anyone else's judgment dictating the rules. She signed the documents carefully, savoring the weight of achievement in her hands. Shortly after, she moved into a modest apartment with sunlight spilling through the windows in the morning. The space was hers entirely, a blank canvas she could fill with routines, colors, and quiet joy. Boxes of her artwork were stacked neatly, and she arranged her belongings with care, savoring the independence that had long felt out of reach. Every step of settling in reminded her that she no longer had to navigate life under someone else's constant scrutiny. Her connection with Marlon ended quietly but firmly. Lyra realized she didn't owe her mother explanations or access to her life. The decision wasn't made in anger, it was made in self-preservation and clarity. In its place, she nurtured the bonds that truly mattered. Boone continued to check in, offering advice and small gestures of encouragement, and Ray's presence remained a steady comfort, a reminder that family could be chosen as well as born into. Lyra began approaching her work with a newfound energy, experimenting, learning, and pushing herself beyond old limits. Her days were full, not with fear or self-doubt, but with possibilities and small victories. Each completed design, each new sketch, reinforced the reality that she was building something lasting, a life rooted in her own decisions. For the first time, she felt completely in charge of her path, surrounded by support that uplifted rather than confined her, stepping into a chapter that was entirely, unapologetically hers. Months passed, and Lyra began hearing whispers about her design reaching new audiences across the state. Galleries requested prints, local businesses asked to showcase her work, and invitations to speak at events arrived unexpectedly. Recognition came quietly but steadily, not flashy or boastful, yet undeniable. Each message reminded her that her talent, perseverance, and voice were being noticed for the first time on a large scale. Meanwhile, word traveled through the circles her mother frequented. Marlon, once seen as polished and influential, began to encounter subtle distances and cold shoulders. People she had counted on for admiration started to remember stories of how she had treated her children, particularly the ones she had neglected. Invitations dwindled, polite smiles gave way to hesitation, and Marlon's carefully maintained image faltered without her realizing why. Lyra felt none of the satisfaction of vengeance in words or confrontation. She didn't need to announce her success, call out her mother, or dwell on past pain. Her triumph existed in her quiet daily life, the freedom to make decisions, the excitement of creating without fear, the fulfillment of being fully herself. Every completed project, every positive response, reinforced her independence and strength. She understood now that the most profound revenge didn't come from anger or retaliation. It came from living fully, thriving despite the cruelty that had once defined her. She had reclaimed her narrative, rebuilt her confidence, and shaped a life that reflected her values and dreams. In the quiet moments, standing in her sunlit apartment, Lyra acknowledged a simple truth: the deepest satisfaction lay not in seeing her mother falter, but in knowing she would never again allow anyone to diminish her. Her worth was hers alone, unshakable and reclaimed. Hey besties! Thanks for sticking with me through Lyra's story. Imagine growing up invisible while your sister is celebrated, only to be humiliated by the person meant to love you most. Lyra's journey shows how betrayal can push someone to rebuild, find independence, and create a life on their own terms. She turned pain into strength and success. If this moved you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.